The mud on her boots was still wet when the housekeeper told her where she would sleep. Not in the guest quarters. Not in the room that had once belonged to her mother. In the attic, above the linen storage, in a room so narrow that the door could not open fully without striking the iron bed frame. Josephine set her bag on the floor and did not say anything. She had learned, over the past 2 years, that saying things did not help. The housekeeper, a woman named Mrs. Colbert, had looked her over when she arrived, looked her over the way you look at something you're not sure belongs in the house. Josephine had worn her plainest dress for exactly this reason. Gray wool, no lace. The cuffs slightly frayed where she had not bothered to replace them. She had wanted to look like a woman who needed the work. She did not want anyone to look at her face too carefully and wonder where they had seen it before. "You'll start in the library," Mrs. Colbert had said. "Cataloguing. His Grace does not like people touching his books without knowing what they're doing. You have references?" Josephine had handed over the letter she had written herself, signed with a name she had borrowed from a woman she'd briefly known in Edinburgh. She had felt no particular guilt about it. The alternative was to arrive at Thornfield Park as Miss Josephine Alderton, rightful daughter of the late Earl of Thornwick, and ask politely to be allowed inside the house that was legally, she was fairly certain, still hers. That had not seemed wise. She had not seen the Duke on her first day, nor her second. He was somewhere in the East Wing, she was told, dealing with correspondence. The library was on the ground floor, south-facing, and in the mornings the light came through the tall windows in long pale sheets that fell across the shelves, and the turkey carpet, and the reading table where she worked. It was a beautiful room. It had always been a beautiful room. She remembered it from when she was 8 years old, sitting on the floor beside her father's chair while he read aloud to her from Gulliver's Travels, doing different voices for the Lilliputians until she laughed so hard she spilled her hot chocolate on the rug. The stain was still there, in the far corner, half hidden by the leg of an armchair. She had noticed it on her first morning and had stood looking at it for a long time, before she remembered herself and turned back to the shelves. Her father had been dead for 3 years. The estate had passed to her uncle, Reginald. No, she stopped herself. She would not use his name even in her own thoughts. He had been the reason she could not come back here through the front door. He had been the reason for the solicitor's letter, and the letter before that, and the one before that, each one more final than the last. Each one explaining in careful legal language that the terms of her father's will had been contested, that the matter was under review, that she should not make any decisions regarding the estate until further notice. 3 years of further notice. 3 years of a small set of rooms in Edinburgh, and then Halifax, and then briefly Toronto, while everything her father had built was managed by a man who had never once visited Thornfield Park while the Earl was alive. She had not come back to make a scene. She had come back because there was something in this house that she needed, and she could not get it any other way. The Duke of Wrentham had been in residence for 6 weeks. That was what Mrs. Colbert said, volunteering the information over supper in the servants' hall, with the air of someone recounting a mild weather event. He had taken the house on a long lease. He was from the north. He was not married. He did not entertain. He did not like cut flowers in the front rooms, which the previous housekeeper had apparently taken as a personal affront. "What does he like?" asked one of the kitchen girls. Bess, 17, cheerful in a way that seemed genuine rather than performed. "Quiet," said Mrs. Colbert. "Order. He likes things where he left them." Josephine filed this away. She was good at filing things. She had spent 2 years filing things, names, facts, small details that might prove useful. In the part of her mind she kept separate from the part that was tired and grieving and increasingly uncertain she had made the right decision. She had made the right decision. She told herself this before she went to sleep that night, in the narrow bed in the attic, listening to the wind against the eaves. She was here. She had gotten inside. Now she needed to find the letters. Her father had kept a correspondence with the family solicitor that went back 20 years, not the official correspondence that had been taken, or lost, or possibly destroyed. She didn't know which. What she was looking for was the private letters, the ones he had written by hand and never sent through the firm. He had mentioned them once, when she was older, 17 or 18, sitting with him in this same library in the evening while the fire burned low. He had said, "There are things I should have put in order, and I have not put them in order, and I am sorry for it." She had not understood what he meant. She had assumed he meant the usual kind of things. She had not known then that he was dying. The letters, if they still existed, would be in the library. He had always kept his private papers in the library, in the bottom drawer of the oak desk that had been his father's before him. She had checked the drawer on her second morning. It was locked. She did not yet have a way to open it without drawing attention to herself. She was working on it. She met the Duke on a Thursday, 9 days after she arrived. She was on the library ladder, the tall one on the brass rail, the one she had always been slightly afraid of as a child, reaching for a volume on the top shelf when she heard the door open. She did not look down. She had learned that looking down made the height worse. "You're the new cataloguer," said a voice. It was not a question. She finished extracting the book, tucked it under her arm, and descended 3 rungs before she turned to look. He was taller than she had expected from the description. Dark coat, no cravat, the top button of his shirt undone in a way that suggested he had been working and had not thought to change. He was perhaps 32 or 33. He had the look of someone who spent a great deal of time outdoors and a great deal of time reading, and had found a way to combine both without particularly caring what anyone thought of either. He was looking at the book under her arm. "That's Montaigne," he said. "Yes," she said, "the 1603 Florio translation. It was shelved with the French editions, which is where I imagine someone put it years ago and then forgot about it. I was going to move it." He looked at her then properly, the way you look at someone when they have said something unexpected. She held herself very still. She was good at being still. "Do you read Montaigne?" he said. "I've read some of the essays," she said. "My father liked him." She had not meant to say that. She said it anyway and then waited. "What did your father think of him?" the Duke said. "He thought he was the only philosopher who was honest about how little he understood himself," she said. "He said most men write as though they have already figured out what they think, and Montaigne writes as though he is figuring it out as he goes." The Duke was quiet for a moment. "That's a better description than I've read in most introductions," he said. He looked at the shelves, then back at her. "Carry on." He left. She stood on the ladder and let out a slow breath. Then she climbed back up and kept working. She found the key on a Friday. It was not where she expected it. Not in the usual place, the small dish on the mantelpiece, where her father had always kept it, because of course someone had cleared that out long ago. It was in the spine of a book, slipped between the pages and the binding of a volume of Johnson's Lives of the Poets that had been shelved sideways in the back of the lowest shelf, as though someone had pushed it there in a hurry. Her father had done that. He had hidden things in books his whole life. He had thought it was clever. Her mother had found it maddening. Josephine stood for a long time with the key in her hand. She waited until the house was quiet, until after the last of the kitchen staff had gone upstairs, and the lights in the hallway had been put out. Then she came back down. The key fit. The drawer opened with the particular sound she remembered, the soft wooden give of a drawer that sticks slightly in damp weather, and inside were the letters, bound with a length of ordinary household string, perhaps 40 of them, in her father's handwriting. She sat down on the floor beside the desk and began to read. It took her most of the night. When she finally understood what the letters contained, she sat for a long time without moving. The fire had died hours ago. The room was cold. Outside, the sky was beginning to lighten in the east, the particular gray-blue of an early morning in late autumn, and she could hear, very faintly, something moving in the kitchen. One of the maids, starting early. The letters were not about the estate. They were about the Duke, not this Duke, his father, the previous Duke of Wrentham. Her father had known him well, for nearly 30 years, a friendship that went back to school, to the same years at the same institution, the kind of friendship that most people do not find more than once in their lives. The letters described it with the careful, slightly embarrassed language of a man who finds deep feeling difficult to put into words. The shared interest in natural history, the long arguments about politics, the summers when the families had visited back and forth, and then, gradually, a different kind of letter, about a dispute, about a document, about her uncle. Her father had known 10 years before he died that her uncle was planning to contest the will. The previous Duke had warned him, had told him, in specific terms, that Reginald had already consulted a solicitor and had already found a way to argue that the entail could be broken, that a daughter could not inherit under the original terms. The late Duke had written, "You must put this right while you can. You must make it official, formal, witnessed, registered. Do not trust that it will hold on its own." Her father had not done it. She did not know why. Perhaps he thought he had more time. Perhaps he could not bear to sit down with a solicitor and speak plainly about the fact that he was dying. He had been like that, capable of enormous thought, and sometimes incapable of the simple practical action that thought required. And now the current Duke of Wrentham was sleeping 20 feet above her head, in the house that should have been hers, and he had no idea that his father had spent the last 10 years of his life trying to help her father fix exactly this problem. She put the letters back in the drawer. She locked it. She went upstairs. She did not sleep. She was at her table in the library when he came in the next morning, earlier than usual. She heard him stop just inside the door. "You look like you haven't slept," he said. "I slept," she said without looking up. He crossed the room and looked at the catalogue she had been adding to. She had made perhaps 4 entries since sitting down, which was not much for 3 hours of work, but she had been finding it difficult to see the point of the task. "You've been here 11 days, he said. "Yes, you've catalogued more than anyone I've hired in the last 2 years. He paused. "Most of them last about a week. They find the room oppressive." "I don't find it oppressive," she said. Then, before she could stop herself, "I find it familiar." He looked at her. She had said too much. She knew she had said too much. "Have you been here before?" he said. She looked at the shelf in front of her. She looked at her pen. She looked at her hands. "No," she said. "I meant the kind of room. I grew up around books." He was quiet for a long moment. She could feel him looking at her. "What's your name?" he said. "Your full name." She had prepared for this. She had a name ready, had practiced it, had written it on the false letter of reference. It sat right there, just behind her teeth, perfectly rehearsed. She opened her mouth. "Josephine," she said, and then stopped. She could not say the other name. She had said the wrong one, her own, and now the rest would not come. The false surname sat in her throat like something she couldn't swallow. The silence stretched. "Josephine," he said. "Yes, Josephine what?" She looked at him then. It was a mistake, and she knew it. He was watching her with the expression of a man who has already understood more than he has been told, and is waiting to see if she will tell him the rest. "I need to speak plainly with you," she said, "and I am aware that what I'm about to say will sound—" She stopped. "I don't know how it will sound, but I need you to know that I am not here to cause trouble for you, and I am not here to take anything that is yours, And what I found last night in the library was not what I came looking for, but I think you need to know what it is." He pulled the chair out from the opposite side of the reading table and sat down. He folded his hands on the table in front of him. He did not say anything. She told him. She told him her name, her full name, her real name. She told him about her father and the estate and the letters and the 3 years in Edinburgh and Halifax and Toronto. She told him about her uncle and the will and the solicitor's letters. She told him what she had found in the drawer. She told him about his father. She had not cried in a very long time. She did not cry now. She spoke as evenly as she could, and she watched his face while she spoke, and she waited. When she finished, the room was very quiet. The Duke stood. He went to the window and stood with his back to her for a moment, looking out at the lawn. A light rain had started, the soft, unhurried kind that in this part of the country could last all day. "My father died 4 years ago," he said. "I know. He never mentioned a daughter. He may not have known how serious it had become," she said. "Or he may have thought my father would take care of it. He was." She paused. "He was very good at thinking things would work out." The Duke turned around. "The letters," he said. "They're in the desk?" "Yes. You put them back." "I put them back and locked the drawer," she said. "The key is in the spine of the Johnson, the second shelf from the bottom, left of the window." She paused. "That is where my father always kept it." He looked at her for a long time. "You've been inside this house before," he said. "Yes. How long?" "Most of my life," she said. "I was born upstairs. My mother died in this house. My father's portrait is in the east corridor, the second painting from the end, next to the window. The study smells of cedar because my father kept cedar blocks in the fireplace flue to discourage the starlings. The stain on the library carpet in the far corner by the armchair is hot chocolate. I spilled it when I was 8. He read to me from Gulliver's Travels, and I laughed too hard." The Duke was very still. "I'm telling you this," she said, "not because I want to make a claim. I understand the lease. I understand the legal situation. I am not here to." She stopped again. She pressed her hands flat on the table and made herself breathe. "I came here to find something in writing that would prove what my uncle did. I found something else instead. And I think you should know about it, because your father spent the last years of his life trying to prevent exactly what happened." He went to the desk. He went to the correct shelf, without asking her to show him, crouched down, and drew out the Johnson. The key was there. He held it for a moment, then he put it in his pocket. "I'm going to read the letters," he said. "Yes," she said. "Of course. And then we're going to have a conversation," he said, "with my solicitor present, about what legal remedies exist." She had not expected that. She had expected. She didn't know what she had expected. She had expected him to ask her to leave. She had expected to be back on the road to Halifax by nightfall, with nothing but the knowledge that she had tried. "You don't have to," she said. "My father was not a man who involved himself in things lightly," he said. He looked at her steadily. "If he spent 10 years on this, it mattered to him, and what mattered to him matters to me." She looked at the window. The rain was heavier now, the lawn disappearing into gray. "You should know," he said after a moment, "that if you had simply told me who you were when you arrived, I would have. I imagine I would have been considerably less composed than I'm being now. As it stands, you've had 11 days to arrange your thoughts. I've had 11 days of believing you were a competent cataloguer with an interesting opinion of Montaigne." There was something in his voice that was not quite humor and not quite not humor. "I am a competent cataloguer," she said. "I noticed," he said. He looked at the shelves. "You sorted the French from the English on the 3rd shelf on your 2nd day. Someone had mixed them." "Someone had mixed them for 12 years," he said. "I had given up mentioning it." She did not know what to say to that, so she said nothing. He did not seem to require a response. He stood for another moment looking at the room, at the shelves, and the catalogue, and the window, and the stain in the corner, with an expression she could not quite read. "Miss Alderton," he said. "Yes, the attic room is not adequate," he said. "Mrs. Colbert will move you to the guest wing this afternoon. The corner room, if you have no objection. I believe the light is good." He took the key from his pocket and looked at it once more. Then he walked to the door. "I'll send for the solicitor on Monday," he said. And then he was gone, and she was alone in the room that had been her father's, and through the window the rain came down across the lawn, and the old oak at the edge of the garden stood the way it had always stood, the same tree, in the same ground, unchanged. She stayed where she was for a long time. Then she picked up her pen and went back to work.